Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for coming tonight to our panel discussion on confronting anti-Asian racism. And this is being held as a critical conversation that we generally hold monthly here at MTSU. My name is Daniel Green, and I serve as the Director of Intercultural and Diversity Affairs here at MTSU. And I just want to welcome everyone, and again, thank you for being here tonight on a Friday for our critical conversation. I will serve as moderator tonight and would like to introduce you to our co-moderator, Mahlet Aklile.
Good evening, everyone. I am Mahlet Aklile, as Daniel stated. I am a current student here at MTSU, and I also work as a program coordinator here at the Intercultural and Diversity Affairs Office.
So we are here today to stand in solidarity with the Asian and Asian American community as we've witnessed a growth in violence against their community that was fueled at the outside of the pandemic in the early parts of 2020. And recently, as you all know, a national discussion about violence targeting the Asian American and Pacific Islander community was reignited when 8 people were killed during shootings at spas in the Atlanta area, and 6 of those killed were Asian women. No amount of fear justifies the prejudice and discrimination and attacks against Asians that we're seeing today. Racist scapegoating has a long and ugly history that has impacted countless communities of color. It's critical that Asian people feel safe, especially in these extraordinary times. The murders in Atlanta were indicative of an undocumented increase in anti-Asian rhetoric and anti-Asian hate crimes over the past year. They also are indicative of hatred against women and racist misogyny against Asian women in particular. Here at MTSU, Asian Americans are vital to the work that we do. A great percentage of our students are of Asian descent, and members of the Asian American community also populate various levels and areas of the university departments. And we're here tonight together to stand in solidarity with Asian American community members that are represented not only just here at MTSU, but also within the Middle Tennessee community. Being in a position, where you are disliked, hated, and bullied for who you are, though you did nothing wrong, can easily be one of the most painful things that you can ever experience. But at the same time, these experiences can be also an avenue for change. And that is the purpose of today's discussion: to grieve, to educate, and to inspire. But before we begin, I would like for you to turn your attention to this video presentation.
He came forward and slashed me from cheek to cheek. He didn't say anything, he just did it. And nobody came, nobody helped me. When I left the train, I thought I wouldn't make it.
Noel Quintana's case in New York is just one of almost 4,000 anti-Asian hate incidents reported in the US over the past year. In cities like San Francisco, a large Asian American population hasn't stopped the harassment either.
I noticed a young gentleman who wasn't wearing his mask, so I walked a little faster. Once he got within earshot, I asked him, just for the safety of my infant, to please wear a mask. At that point, he locked eyes with me and charged us. He decided to walk straight at us. I let out a few choice words and ran into the house screaming for my husband, who came running down the stairs and scared him away. The young man came back at least 3 times to throw things into our foyer and leave not only a racist note, but a racist mask that he wrote on.
you don't want to reveal your identity. Why is that?
I can't endanger my young infants. They've already been, before the age of 1, subjected to hate crime. I'm not going to give anybody else another chance to do that to them again.
We keep updates.
I think the outrage that you're seeing from the Asian American community has a lot to do with feeling invisible, having a lot to do with our issues not getting attention and recognition and resources. And it has to do with the model minority myth that really was manufactured to deny structural racism.
We had already been seeing a lot of news that there's people getting beat down, robbed in Chinatown, and we were just really hurt to see that. You know, we were really hurt, and we just thought, you know, we need to start doing something. We need to go out to the community and patrol.
Do you see your role as defending Chinatown from these attacks?
We see our role as preventing and also as reporting as well. So we do a lot of observing, recording, and reporting. Those are 3 main tasks. We don't actually get into physical fights with anybody. This is our weapon right here. It's, hey, excuse me, this is our weapon.
But this community doesn't always report crimes, and activists fear that the actual number is far worse.
We have members of our community who don't speak English as their primary language, or they're undocumented, or they might have this sense of, you know, what can be done about it. And so there's a deep distrust, and it's for legitimate reasons.
So again, tonight we would like to provide a space to process and amplify these current events that you just saw in the video. You know, we wanted to allow space for our students, especially those of Asian descent, to validate their experiences, as well as staff and faculty, not only on our campus, but in the Middle Tennessee community and beyond. And we want to provide everyone with this space to express feelings about what's happening and not happening in local and national dialogue. I would like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for a moment, the Center for Chinese Music and the Asian Student Association, the Center for Asian Studies, and the 411 Project. Thank you all so much for supporting this event and being a part of it. I would like to introduce to you all the team leader of the 411 Project, Casey Hamby, who would like to share a few remarks regarding their initiative on addressing anti-Asian violence.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you everyone for being here with us tonight. As Daniel mentioned, I'm with the 411 Project, and we are a student-led initiative at MTSU partnered with Adventure Partners. And we were tasked with creating and implementing a program to prevent targeted violence and domestic terrorism. And our team chose to focus on the increased violence against Asian American and Pacific Islanders since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And with our initiative, we want to encourage a pledged commitment to allyship and build a community of support with the resources that are available on our website at the411project.org. And I will put that in the chat for anyone that wants to look. And one of the fundamental elements of our pledge is being there to amplify and uplift voices, not necessarily be the voice, which is what brings us here tonight. So with that, I will hand it back over to Daniel and we can get started.
All right, thank you, Casey. We are joined here by an amazing group of panelists, and I do want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So let's start with Jennifer Wang.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'm happy to be here as well. So my name is Jennifer. It's actually pronounced Wong. Most people don't know that. So that's okay. I identify as Taiwanese American. I live here in Nashville. I work at Assurion. I'm the Director of Business Development and Strategy for the Assurion for Enterprise team here. I'm also on the board of API Middle Tennessee, which is a nonprofit here in Middle Tennessee that seeks racial justice by uplifting API voices. And I also co-founded and co-facilitate a meditation group in Nashville that's now online for people of color.
Thank you for being here this evening, Jennifer. Our next panelist is Sean Paik of CNN.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Daniel, and thanks, MTSU, for hosting this. Yeah, my name's Sean Paik. I am an associate producer at CNN International. I started working at CNN in December of 2019, so COVID has been the majority of my time at the company. I'm also part of an organization called the Asian American Journalists Association. So, you know, we've been, this is a topic that we've been, you know, aware of since long before the beginning of the pandemic, and one that we've kind of collectively been talking about more and more since the pandemic. So happy to share my perspective today.
Thank you, Mr. Paik. We also have with us Silong Sam.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Silong Sam. I am Cambodian American, and I am the co-advisor of the Asian Culture Club at Chattanooga State Community College. We're a very small town, and we have a really small population of Asian students. But I started the club in January 2020, so just before the pandemic. So we still have a lot to learn, but thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We also have Mr. Robert Fowler.
Hi, my name is, and you call me Bob. My background is, I'm Japanese American. My mother is from Izaki, Japan, which is on Kyushu, the southern island. She met my father during the Korean conflict back in the 50s, and they got married and moved here, and I was born here in the States. So I'm half Japanese. I'm a professor, assistant professor in the aerospace department here at MTSU. And I'm also the faculty advisor for the Asian Students Association.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We also have Jane Lim.
Hi all. I'm actually not an American Asian. I'm actually a Singaporean. So it'll be nice to actually provide international perspective for how Asians are being looked at in the United States. I've been in US for more than 10 years. I'm actually an associate professor in the College of Education. So I work with teachers who are getting licensure to become elementary school teachers all the way from preschool to grade 3. We do not have a large Asian student population. However, the school are getting more and more diverse. So I think it's so important for teachers to understand, what the students are actually going through, just, watching the news that's happening and the impact on these children that are growing up. And thank you so much for having me here today.
Absolutely, thank you. And finally, we have Guan Ping Zhang. Not sure, is he here? Maybe he wasn't able to make it. So we will go ahead and begin our panel discussion. And this first question is actually for Sean Paik. The incidents that have been reported have increased since the pandemic. But why do you think, that it hasn't been reported as intensely before the pandemic?
Yeah, so, the way the media kind of has been covering this, right? It's I guess to answer your question directly, but before the pandemic, there were incidents of violence against Asians, right? There's incidents of violence against everybody, right? It's not exclusive to Asians. As the video showed, violence against Asians is not something that's widely reported, right? It's a community that's not always, if I were to just speak from personal experience, it's a community that is more likely to kind of, take it and shake it off and not just take it, but, move past it and try and grow stronger from it. I think, a lot of my mentors in the past have told me about kind of ways that they've grown up. And a lot of the times, right, it's the kind of thing that's a lot easier to internalize and try and grow from it on an individual basis, right? So, I think before the pandemic, you're looking at individual events, and individual events are not as reportable, right? When it becomes a pattern, then you have more of a story that the media can work with. And so what the pandemic really gave us was a clear, obvious pattern of violence against Asians. And so that right there is more of a story that you can work with when you're missing things like data, and you're missing things like voices who are willing to speak up, and you're missing things like video, right? When you have a clear-cut pattern, an obvious pattern, then you can create a little traction, and then people, maybe more bystanders are finding more of a reason to record video that we can work with, or things like that. So I think what it really comes down to is seeing this pattern, and the pattern is what ends up driving the story.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peck. Anyone else would like to chime in with that about that particular question?
I would. I think it has a lot to do with the model minority issue. Asians, Korean Americans, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans have always been very quiet minority. We don't protest. No, we don't make a lot of noise. And I think it's just the Asian mentality, the culture. My mother didn't teach me any Japanese. I know no Japanese at all. And it was because she wanted me to assimilate. She wanted me to be like everyone else. Unfortunately, I'm not like everyone else. I look different, even though I don't sound Japanese. And in some respects, I don't look full Japanese. I have some of my father's features. They just wanted to blend in. And I think that's part of the problem. We've always just wanted to blend in. We don't want to make waves. And as a result, a lot of the issues that are plaguing us now have come to fruit.
Yeah, I would add also that even for those people who have been making noise, because there definitely are Asian American activists out there who have been yelling and saying, look at what's going on, that model minority myth plays into it as well, especially when you think about race in America. Most people think of it as a black and white issue. And so in a way, Asians and Asian Americans, we've been seen as invisible, and there's almost like this hierarchy of suffering. I've heard it called the oppression Olympics as well, where it's like, oh, you guys have so many of you that are doing fine. The income inequality within the Asian American group is the largest within any racial or ethnic group in the country. So you see visibly that there are a lot of quite well-off Asians who have done well, but there are also a lot of people who are not doing as well. I think there's a statistic that Filipinx nurses during COVID died at 3 times the rate of non-Filipinx nurses. So I think these differences within the diaspora have been washed over and just replaced with this model minority myth, which sometimes is also supported then by the culture, as Professor Mahlet was saying.
Absolutely, thank you for that.
And can I just to add on to what Jennifer just said, I so agree with what you just said, about that, because I think within the Asian culture itself, there's so many different groups. And I think a lot of times it's a lack of education and ignorance. And, people just kind of assume and generalize that, this is the way that you act and behave, However, each of this ethnicity and each of this group, we are all very different. We're just unique individual.
Thank you, Jane. So our next question will be coming from our co-moderator, Mahlet.
Okay, yeah, so we've seen the very traumatizing and unfortunate stories on the news and also via social media. And the main reason why we hold these critical conversations every month, focusing on the current stories, is because we want to give local community members, students, faculty, anyone who wants to participate, the platform to speak on personal experiences. So the next thing I do want us to focus on is just share different stories that may have happened to you. And it doesn't have to be like, the man who was like, his face was slashed, that not as, even if it's not as far as that, it starts from verbal assault and, seen at a grocery store, airport, anywhere. So I just want us to kind of get started with that conversation.
So I think I'll go ahead and start with that. So over the last year, this is something that I've had to reflect on because I don't think we really think about it, because a lot of our experiences that root within racism aren't always violent in nature. And so most of my experiences have been what I think are unintentional from other people. So when I first moved to the South, I had a supervisor that asked me if I was half white. And I was just baffled by that because I'm dark in complexion, I have black hair. I was really confused. So in asking him, what made you think that? His response was that, well, my English was really good. And that was kind of shocking because, I'm second generation and I was born in California and I only know English, kind of like how Bob was saying, like, I don't know any Khmer. And so it was kind of shocking to hear. And that also, another story that just popped in my head was that when I was in, my family was enrolling me in kindergarten, I was put in an ESL program, so English as a second language. And this is as a very small child. And again, English is my only language. So things like that, making you feel like a perpetual foreigner is something that we experience a lot, I think. So
I can definitely add to this with some of my own personal experiences. And I don't think I said this earlier, but I'm actually also from Chattanooga. I grew up in Chattanooga. So shout out to Silong there. But, I think one of the things that Bob said in his first answer is a very real and relatable experience for Asian Americans, right? Like, I grew up in the South. My parents are first generation. They went through a lot of racism, a lot of, shared first generation experiences. And so by the time, they were raising me and my siblings, they decided, we're not going to teach these kids English or Korean. We're not going to teach them Korean for a very specific reason. We want them to be very American, and we don't want them to go through what we had to go through just for speaking another language. Even if it makes them bilingual, we'd rather them be more American. And so that was a very clear decision that they made. And so I'll share with you two experiences that I want to kind of tie into this. You know, when I was in high school, you know, I remember, you know, the fellow student had, you know, he came up to me once and said, "Sean, you're basically white." And I just remember being very taken aback by that statement, because the reality is I'm not white. And I think that was kind of a really key moment in my life where I realized, oh, whiteness is the, it's the ruler, it's the base of what, you know, of what people look at Americans as being, right? It's not Asians, it's not African Americans, it's whiteness is the basis of what it is perceived to be American. And so that was this moment where I just really, you know, kind of had a lot of questions, a lot of, you know, why are we friends? Kind of a thing. Like, are we friends because you see me in this way? Because I don't want you to see me in this way. I want you to see me as me. And I am Asian. I'm not white. So I'll fast forward a little bit into when I had my first job at the Chattanooga Times-Free Press. I was a photographer. I wasn't on the job. I was freelancing some photo work for a wedding shower. It was like a proposal shower. It was kind of one of those events. And I remember going there, taking pictures. I was 18 at the time. And I ran into this, you know, older white woman, and she was really interested in the fact that, you know, I'm Korean. And we started talking. And I think, you know, it kind of came up like, oh, do you, you know, your parents came from Korea? I'm like, yeah, they came from Korea. And you don't speak Korean? No, I don't speak Korean. Immediately, as soon as I said I don't speak Korean, she said, that was a mistake. Your parents messed up. They shouldn't have done that. And I just remember being so incredibly insulted because I know exactly why my parents didn't teach me Korean, right? Like, I know the reason that they didn't teach me Korean. And yet the opposite's happening now. The opposite's happening, right? Like, I'm being told that, you know, I'm being not attacked, but, you know, like Silang was saying, it's not necessarily the most physical attacks. They're very microaggression. They're things that people don't necessarily think to be insulting. This was one of the most insulting things that ever happened to me. I feel like, you know, it was just, it ate at me and it ate at me. And, you know, it still takes me time to really reckon with this, because today, you know, as a journalist in international news, you know, I still don't speak Korean. I mean, my Korean's gotten a little bit better, but there's this tug of war. It's like, am I supposed to be able to speak another language to help my reporting? Or am I supposed to be really, really good at English just to be seen as American? And it's this constant conflict that either way is wrong. So.
Well, I'll chip in. I'm probably one of the older people here. So, you know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And I grew up in a state that was not very diverse, the state of Maine, the Northeast section. My high school was just about all white. I was lucky. I had a couple of other Japanese American kids in my class, unusual in the state of Maine, but I grew up in a more urban area of the state. But at the time, kids were cruel. And I'm interested to hear from the younger people here, but there wasn't the type of attitude that there is today, that, you know, racial slurs, about calling people names, and I won't repeat some of the names that I've been called, you know, during my life. Very hurtful. And, you know, when you're a kid in junior high, high school, or middle school, all you want to do is fit in. You want to fit in. You want to be like everyone else. And if you don't look like everyone else, that's very difficult. And if there are other people who are determined to make you feel like you're not like everyone else, it can be very painful. And I'm just curious, has that changed at all in high schools and middle schools?
I'd like to weigh in on that, Professor Fowler. I have two sons, 16 and 18, and like in the chat I just said, my mother was half Hispanic, or was a Hispanic. Her father was half Hispanic, and I think she raised us to be not racial at all. And I think that was because of how her father was treated, how her grandmother was treated, and of course that's how I teach my sons is to, doesn't matter what we look like, where we come from, we're all humans. We should all be treated fairly. We should all be treated with, respect, kindness. We're going to disagree, but yes, to answer your question, younger generation, I think, in my point of view, my mother going through that, my grandfather, that put a different perspective because we want to end that, profiling, that, stereotype. So.
Okay, well, my name is Betty Apoto. I am not Asian, but I am from an American, and I was born in Africa. I was young, I was 5 years old, and my mom, I couldn't speak English when I came to the United States. And I would tell you that I am glad and I am proud that my mom taught me English. I am so proud that I'm engaging Asian, because I love Asian people. I love them so much because they are intelligent and they are smart. As for me, when I was in high school, I was bullied for my entire life, from elementary to middle school to high school. And now I am here in Middle Tennessee State University and learning different cultures, because cultures are amazing. So for me, I would say is that I see, the thing is that I am tired, and we all know that we're tired. And for me, I have gone through that. I'm not in a big city, but I was born into a farming because I love farming, and I always spend time with my mom. And the thing is that I think is that it's very hard to see people looking at us differently, and it's very difficult too. And it's really sad to see that what is going on in Asia, what is going on in America, and what is going on around this world. And sometimes people don't talk about it too much. And it's like bringing us down so much, and how that people are looking at you, because I've been cussed out a whole lot. But at the end, I found out that finding people that they are looked exactly like me, I am very happy finding good people in this world instead of just, you know, arguing with each other and saying things to each other. It's unnecessary. So yeah.
I'd like to add on to that. My name is Bella He. I'm Laotian and Chinese American. But I think the way Asian racism has really changed is like my mom, she's from Laos, so she wasn't born here. But what she did move here when she was about 9. She told me of this instance where she was bullied, like in the bathroom. Kids were like ripping up her clothes just because she looked different because she didn't speak English. For me, I've never faced anything like that in school. I think what we see more is Asian racism disguised as humor. Like my fellow classmates have thought that these little remarks they make, these microaggressions, are supposed to come off as funny, when they really come off as ignorant. And I've had this even with some substitute teachers, just saying these like really snide remarks, just like calling off roll. Hey, your name sounds like a Hawaiian island. Your name sounds like an energy drink. Those are two real things that these adult substitute teachers have said to me. And I think that's really the difference in Asian racism and how it's developed. I think these days it's more disguised as humor and it's not as explicit or direct as it used to be.
Thank you all so much for the perspective from a student. Any of our other panelists would like to chime in on this question before we move along to our next question?
I can share a little bit from a business perspective and what I've experienced in that realm. And I have experienced racism in other realms as well, but I wanted to focus on this. It took a while for me to realize that some of these things were due to me being an Asian woman. And I can't pick apart whether it's because I'm a woman or because I'm Asian. I don't think it really matters. But the perception has been that I'm more soft-spoken, I don't speak up, that I am really good at like the administrative things and that I'm kind of like passive and a good worker, but not necessarily a good leader. I had a boss say to me specifically when I was asking him, why am I not getting promoted to the executive committee? Had him say to me, oh, you don't like put your fist down hard enough and like, stand up to me enough and voice your ideas enough. When other people of color at the company said, that's not true at all. I hear you talking about your ideas all the time. But to him, that CEO, he could only hear it from the person who did end up getting promoted, which was, guess what, a white male, right? So it's things like that. It's things like my peers, if we're on a meeting together, saying, oh, Jennifer, are you taking notes? Or, oh, Jennifer, do you want to organize the follow-up call? And I have to make a real effort to say, no, you can do it. And then, of course, the typical, oh, where are you from? No, you're from LA. No, where are you really from? Like telling me I'm wrong with my answer. Which is just like this, it's like that perpetual foreigner that we were talking about and this very strong sense of othering, right? Oh no, I want to pin you into your right exotic box. So tell me where you're really from. You're not American.
Jennifer, I so agree with that. I've gotten that so much, and I'm sure everyone has. But when we get that question, I think that we've been asked that, where are you from, for so long, and receive that. When we say we're from Chattanooga, they'll be like, well, where are you really from? And we've received that response, I think, so many times that we've just been kind of like groomed to go ahead and cut to the chase, just be like, okay, I know you're really trying to ask me what my ethnicity is or like where my family is from. So I think a lot of our automatic answers are just like, like I'm Cambodian, whatever, and I've really had to teach myself or like relearn, like, don't do that. Like say, no, I'm from, Washington, DC. And if they come back with, no, where are you really from? I will be like, oh, you're asking what my ethnicity is. Just to educate them as well, like what their question really is, not where are you from.
That's a great way to respond because I get a lot of that question, where are you from? At first they say, are you from England? I say, no, I'm from Singapore. And then they say, you mean that's in China? I say, no, that's not in China. And then it's a great way actually for me to share the location of the country, what that country is about, the diversity of the country. So often it's like what you guys were saying about, educating. But all the sharing, going back to what Bob was saying earlier about, the Asian blending in and, just being similar together. So I remembered that, when I went to Buffalo, New York, and I was a teaching assistant then. So when I first went into the school, it was very interesting because I have to teach like a group of undergraduate students. And so they told me, make sure you watch all the American sitcoms like Friends and learn how to speak American English so that the students can understand you. So I was thinking, why do I have to speak American English? I mean, how do people understand differences if they never hear somebody speak with a different accent, They are never going to learn anything different because everything is going to be the same. So I said that, no, I think it will be good for them to understand me and learn, to listen to this different accent, So I think we need to also speak up in that sense and try to educate, like what you were talking about, sharing our, like our background, ethnicity. I think we should be proud of that so that other people can learn who we are.
I agree with you too, Jane. When you pretty much hit it on the head. We need more people to speak up. We need more of anti-Asian racism, bystander intervention. Interrupting oppressive statements that you all have mentioned, is one important way of intervening against against racism, to make sure our communities work for everyone. We need more allyship to Asian Americans to speak out against, this bigotry and racism, and to challenge, some of these learned prejudice. I would also argue that at a subconscious level, perhaps some people tend to be more, varied in their acceptance of validity of the racialized experience of Asian and Asian American neighbors. And maybe even at a deeper level, some people tend to dismiss the impact of racism directed at Asians and Asian Americans, or when they learn of it, they're maybe some people are at a loss for how to adequately respond, to those types of statements that are made. And that's why I would argue that bystander intervention is definitely a key to addressing some of these issues. Moving to our next question. This one is for actually you, Jane. Jane Lim. What are some historical examples of AAPI hate and oppression, and what impact has it had on Asian Americans today?
Okay, so sorry, can you repeat that again, Daniel?
What are some historical examples of AAPI hate and oppression, and what impact has it had on Asian Americans today?
I think that is a question that, what we are actually currently seeing right now in the news and all this is already showing like an impact of actually what is actually happening. Back to the cultural perspective of how, Asians are being brought up and all this, I think it kind of showcase, the way that Asians react to the situations, and, I think I'm responding to your question in another way, is thinking about like the education, the current education system. How can we actually provide strategies and talk about like social justice and things within our curriculum? So for example, what I did is that, with all this recent violence and things that is going on in the news, I actually introduced the topic of social justice into my curriculum when I'm teaching all these teachers. So when I talk about that, I actually had like a whole session on it. And I was asking the teachers to think about, so what does it mean when you talk about social justice with young children? What does social justice look like in the classroom? What does social justice look like in the playground? What does social justice look like at home? Because, the term is huge, but how do you actually practice it? For example, like in the classroom, does it mean that, how do you talk to your friends? How do you relate to your friends when you're in the playground? Do you push other people because they look different? So what does it mean? So I think a lot of times, just talking about it is good. I think it creates awareness, but developing the strategies and giving them suggestion on what we can actually do about it and what does it look like, it gives the listener an understanding and to saying that, like what some of you were saying, that they are not even aware it was unintentional because they did not even realize that what they did was wrong. So I think it's important to actually talk about specific actions and things about it.
Thank you, Jane.
I have
Sean,
a question for Jane in relation to that, if I may. If that's okay.
Sure.
So, I was raised in a way which was like, oh, be colorblind, right? Like, don't see differences, which basically means like pretend you're white. Do you feel like it's important to teach kids to see those differences and to kind of honor different cultures? Like, if I have a friend that's Black, like learn about their culture, like learn about what it's like to be Black.
So Jennifer, let me share an incident with you. It's very interesting you asked that question because actually young children do not see people as different. In fact, they see people as alike. So in the preschool room, you have all these children that are of different color, like, they are white, they're African American. And I remember this child going to this African American child, touches the skin and say, "You look beautiful." So it's so embracing. I thought that was so beautiful how they just love on each other without seeing that difference. But I think it's also important to let the young children know that, they grow up in a place where there are other people that are alike them. So one of the ways that we actually do is we use like books, storybooks. If you look at the books that we actually have in the rooms, a lot of them have just showcased like the white children, and you don't see as much like Asian or African American children, depicted in the books. I think it's so important to showcase within the environment that diversity. So when they are growing up, they realize that I do have people who look like me. I'm not the only one that look different, and it's okay for me to be in this environment.
thank you for that. Sean, I'll be interested to hear your perspective on that question that I proposed to Jane.
Sure. I'll try and kind of tie it into what Jane was saying in some previous points as well. Actually, Daniel, you said one word that I really think about a lot. That's the word neighbor. And when we talk about the word neighbor, it's in contrast with this idea of being a perpetual foreigner, which I think Jennifer was talking about. And I think a lot of the challenge in my life has been, how do I just be somebody's neighbor? How do I convince somebody that I am their neighbor? Mm-hmm. And so to go back to kind of a previous conversation, when I get the question, where are you from or what are you? That's another question. I started saying I'm a Korean Tennessean, and that just kind of knocks it both out of the way. It's like, no, I'm a Korean. I want you to know I'm Korean, but I'm a Tennessean. And I want you to know that, like, I live in this community. I grew up in this community, and we both eat the same food. We go to the same places, but this is our difference. And I want you to understand that and see me as your neighbor. And I found that to be a very effective kind of thing that kind of gets, a Tennessean to smirk a little. To go back to kind of the question, some historical examples and how does that affect us today? I think, at least from my perspective, in being in international news, there is a pattern, and this is a pattern that is historically documented. American foreign policy dictates how Asian Americans are treated. Okay, American foreign policy with Asia dictates how Asian Americans are treated. And you'll see that come across in a lot of different ways, right? And you'll see that come across today. American foreign policy is a little bit antagonistic towards China right now, which is directly, in my view, is directly impacting how Asian Americans are being treated in this country. And you can date this back to, World War II and before that. In World War II, the racism towards Asians is obvious. It's very well documented. There are so many ways that you can cite that. I want to kind of go into this world of education that kind of Jane was speaking to. American high school students are taught, anybody studying World War II in America, especially in high school systems, is taught that America went to war in the Pacific because Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Right? That's not what's taught in Japan. Realize that that's not what's taught in Japan. in Japan, and there's always going to be debate around this, but and that's history. But in Japan, let me back up. In America, it's taught that Japan made a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. In Japan, what's taught is that America was threatening Japan. America stopped supply of resources to Japan through some means. And Japan gave a warning to America, hey, stop cutting off our resources or we're going to bomb Pearl Harbor. And they gave that warning. And when that didn't happen, then Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. So there's a disconnect, right? No matter what side you take, the story doesn't line up, right? Nevertheless, what we tell American students affects their mentality, affects how they perceive that war. And so, this goes back to this idea that foreign policy in history or in the present is going to dictate how people perceive Asians in America. So if you talk to a Japanese high school student, you can pick one out of the crowd. They're probably going through this experience where, people are learning about this. Their peers are learning about this. And, all of a sudden they might be treated a little bit differently, right? They might be treated like, or they might get those jokes that Silong was talking, or that who was it? I forget who was. I'm sorry, I forget who was bringing that up. But they might get those jokes. Hey, Japan did this because Pearl Harbor, whatever. And so you'll see that foreign policy is very closely tied to how Asians are perceived. And I think this is one of the things that really kind of drives me up the wall. And I think this is one of the areas that we as an American community really need to emphasize. And this is one of the areas that we must educate more people on. There is a very big difference between a Chinese person. Okay, there's a very big difference between the Chinese Communist Party, a person living in China, a Chinese person living in China, and a Chinese American. All right, they're all very different. You have to recognize that. The Chinese Communist Party is different from a Chinese citizen, is different from a Chinese American or a Chinese person living in Mexico or a Chinese person living in Canada or a Chinese person living in Europe. They're all different. And likewise, one of the things that we have to like, the starting point is so far low for us. We can't, as a American society, we can't even differentiate between a Chinese person or a Cambodian American or a Korean American or Japanese American. The starting point's pretty low right now. And so there's no way that we'll be able to make that distinction unless we can start making distinctions within our own community and recognizing that Asian Americans first are very different from other people, from other Asians living around the world. And as long as we're kind of viewed as this monolith, foreign policy for us against China is going to dictate how Korean Americans are being treated, how Japanese Americans are being treated, how Chinese Americans are being treated. Everybody.
Wow, thank you so much, Sean. You just shed some light on a lot of different things. So thank you for that very informative response. Very much needed. Thank you so much. Anyone else?
If I might, as one of the older people here, my mother came to the United States in 1954. That was only 9 years after the end of World War II. And she wasn't really very accepted by my father's family. My father was white. I have an English heritage, but she had problems with her husband's family, my father's family, and she also had problems finding a job in the United States. She ended up working as a seamstress for Health Techs. You may not recognize that name, but they made children's clothing way back when. And she worked for Health Techs as a seamstress for over 30 years. Was one of their best employees and was never, ever offered a promotion. And so I have to think that part of that was racial discrimination. But historically speaking, I have to agree with Sean. It depends on the political situation at the moment. In the 1960s, World War II was still fresh in everyone's mind. I had one of my father's friends used to call me Tojo. Tojo was a Japanese general, famous Japanese general during World War II. And you know, and I have to agree with someone else. Kids don't really see race; they don't see color. I really didn't know that I was different until maybe later on in elementary school, maybe middle school, is when I first realized that, hey, I'm different, and people are treating me differently because of the way I look. And I get the question of where you're from too. I mean, even at my age, even being a mixed race person, I still get that. Where are you from? Or what? And I say, well, I'm from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, but my mother is from Japan originally, and that that makes people think. And I usually get a puzzled look, but it's historically speaking, I have to agree with Sean. It depends on what's happening in politics and in the world. And we're at a time when Asian Americans are being persecuted because of what has happened in the past. I got really angry the other day. I was watching something. I hope there aren't any Ted Nugent fans in the audience, but Ted Nugent came down with COVID, and he wanted to go on video and tell everybody he came down with COVID, even though he's an anti-masker and an anti-vaxxer. And he called it the Chinese virus several times. And I'm thinking to myself, this man just doesn't understand what he's doing. He doesn't understand that he is encouraging violence against Asian Americans. And I'm not sure, Ted Nugent's an older guy like me from my generation. And I think it's something I'm hoping for my children's sake and for my grandchildren's sake, that it's something that will die out with that generation. I'm hoping, and from what I'm seeing in the news and what I'm hearing, I understand it's still with us. But I'm hoping that this can be a start to perhaps seeing less of it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob, for that. We also have with us Dr. Mahan, who serves as the director of the Center for Chinese Music and Culture here at MTSU. She would like to say a few words.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And sorry, I'm a little bit late. And the center is part of the sponsor for this event. And myself being a Chinese, and I'm just very glad that we have this opportunity to get together, to talk, to support each other. I think first and foremost at this time, as an individual and also as a larger group of people, support is more important than anything else. We all are isolated for over a year. Besides the immediate family, we seldom see others. So having support at this time is so important. If I see a friend that I haven't seen for a year, I feel so emotional. Of course, part of this emotion is what we have gone through. Pandemic is one thing, and also this political situation against this hate against Asian, against anybody who who is considered colored. So this situation has been very difficult for all of us. As a center, I have to say, we're located at the Miller Education Center, and this is a center not just for Chinese or Chinese music or Chinese culture. This center is here to advocate for multiculturalism, is here to support every one of you here tonight. And I have planned for the near future, meaning next semester, and also longer term plans to support different organizations, clubs, and local communities from all cultures, and especially Asian cultures beyond Chinese culture. So let's all work together. I think, what hate scares is organization. If we are organized, and we don't have to organize against something, sometimes we just organize to celebrate something, to have this positive energy. We celebrate festivals, we celebrate holidays, from different cultures from Asia. And as long as we're shown together, we're supporting each other, then this community will become more and more positive. That's one thing. And second, I believe a lot of these hate come from fear of unknown. And probably some of you already said that if I wasn't here. Sorry about that. So how do we confront this? I think education is the key. I heard several of you already mentioned strategic planning and teaching to kids, teaching to teachers, and to educate them the differences, the diversities. That's all very good. Just one thing I wanted to say, that color doesn't equal to culture. And different, even Chinese, we share the same color, but we do not necessarily have different cultures. Jane and I have different cultures. I grew up in mainland China, and she grew up in Singapore. And even in terms of language, we speak different languages. So especially when we're talking to kids, I think one thing we have to keep in mind and mindful is not associate color with culture. I made a mistake when I was a performer doing school shows, and I was trying to encouraging an African kid to come to play percussion. I said, well, you're black, you know how to play percussion. Wow, the principal just took me out, really, really, pounded on that. So I learned a hard lesson. That was 20 years ago. And the third thing I want to say is individually, we are proud individual. And some of you are university students, some of you are professors. No matter who you are, and the road you have gone to, to come to this point, you have done what needs to be celebrated, what needs to be proud. And as myself, I growing up in the Cultural Revolution and a child in China, there was very little self-esteem. And I started learning English when I was 23. And I was told by many people, including my families, you would never be able to speak English as a working language. You probably can say hello, and you probably can say a few, casual things. But I just kept going. And I came to the West when I was 37. I finished my PhD when I was 53. So all these things I have done, for many people, that you're too old to do this, you're too old to do that, but I did it all. And I feel very proud. And with this inner pride, and no matter where I go, either it's Kroger's store or it's a gas station, you just have that energy with you, and people do not dare to mess with you. So this is, just want to share with you in these 3 points.
Oh,
the center is here to help, to support.
Thank you so much for that wisdom. Thank you so much, Dr. Mahon. And thank you for all that you do here at MTSU on our campus. And our office, Intercultural and Diversity Affairs, always looks forward to collaborating with the Center for Chinese Music. And thanks for all the things you do here. All right, so our next question will be coming from Mahlet.
So I would like to thank Dr. Han. You mentioned about like organization and staying together, which will lead me to the next topic for discussion. I am a foreigner myself. I am from Ethiopia, so I kind of understand the cultural and generational oppression when it comes to the way foreign Americans raise their children, and that I think all of you have mentioned it about language, like your parents not teaching you the language or the culture because of like racial profiling and the different oppressions that you would face when you're going to school and the discrimination. So what I want to focus on is that with that grooming, that's where we start. Now we're talking about teaching like young adults, their culture. But if we're not starting from the root of it all, like, when they're being raised, learning their culture and language, then we're kind of back to the same position that we are in right now. So for the future generation and for the current youth, what do you recommend? How do you recommend we kind of start up this conversation so they can have a better impact than like the past generations?
And that question is open to any of our panelists.
I think that, it starts at home. We are a product of our environment. We are a product of our, what we see as we grow up. We're not, hate is not, inside, it's taught. So, for me, teaching my boys, to be accepting and understanding of all cultures. And that comes from, like I said, my mother, my grandfather. So, I try to make it, more understandable for them, in society. And I'm a global studies major and that's at a women's degree, or I'm minoring in women's study too. But, like I said, it starts at home. So if you start at home, then hopefully it carries, and that's where it begins.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Brittany. It does start at home. It's all about education, as someone has already said. We have to start with educating our young people. And I think it's already begun to start. I think that people are more sensitive today to this. And I think that that's basically why we're having this conversation today. You wouldn't have seen this conversation happen 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So it is changing. There is reason to be optimistic, but we can't let down our guard. We have to keep working. As far as other cultures, I think it's important to note that being Asian isn't just about being Chinese or Japanese or Philippine. We have Indian faculty, Indian students who are South Asian, right? Southeast Asian. And so, Asian people come in all shapes and colors, not just Chinese or Japanese or Korean. And I'm convinced that exposure to other people, other cultures is critical. If people stay in their own pods, if you will, for example, if someone never ventures out to get to know someone from China or get to know someone who is Black or someone who is Indian, you'll never know what that person is like. You'll never find out that person basically is just like you. There's nothing different. You're both human beings. You just come from a different place and you just have a different culture. And that's really what makes life so interesting. You don't want to limit yourself to your own culture. Makes me laugh to think, but some of these people who are are out there talking about, anti this, anti that, probably the first people to go out and get Chinese food at the Chinese restaurant down the street, right? It's just, and I'm saying this from personal experience, because before I left the state of Maine, which, like I said in the beginning, is basically is 98% white, I really wasn't exposed to other cultures. And when I did finally leave and I moved to the Philadelphia region, I was shocked. I was exposed to a lot of different cultures, but it helped me. It helped me. I made friends with people from other cultures, and it helped me in my career as well, because I ended up, I don't know if I've said this, but I'm a commercial pilot and a flight instructor. And I ended up instructing at a school in Florida that had a contract with Chinese Airlines. All my students were from mainland China. And that experience helped me a lot too. I learned a lot about the culture and the people of mainland China. And someone said, they're not the Communist Party, they're Chinese citizens. And they're just like you and me. They just want to have a good life. They came to the United States, very far from their home, to learn something and to improve their lives, just like you and I. And it's impossible for someone who has never met someone from another culture to understand that. I think that's the key.
Just to jump on that, I think language is a really great way to introduce diversity in that sense too, because the whole idea of language is really to communicate. So using language, just the word hello, we can say hello in Mandarin, we can say hello in Spanish, and just using that, to showcase, to start an education, that there's so many different ways of just using that one word, in all these different languages. It come across as the same meaning, but it's a different means of communication, and even the script itself. So I think if we start up with that positive tone that Mihan was actually talking about, the world will be so much better and so much more beautiful, if we all have that positive mindset. I think a lot of times, using language, if you have never actually traveled out of the other country, you don't know, language could be a means of starting to talk about it, and why do people speak in this language? The background of that language, and talk a little bit about the culture, because that would be a really great way to introduce to other people different culture, not necessarily just about Asian, but other countries and other culture too.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Jane. I think, looking at how can you expose people to other cultures at an individual, at a household level is very important. But from a structural level, there needs to be more of an emphasis on foreign languages, whether it be Spanish or German or Chinese or, whatever language there are. The really, for as globalized a nation as America is, it's surprising how little we emphasize foreign language, right? If you look at countries in Europe, right, there are children who speak 5 languages, and that's the norm, at least bilingual, right? It's very shocking that a country like America, with the resources that we have, with the number of different types of people we have, we're the most diverse country in the entire world. How is it that we only speak English and any other language is shunned, and any other language is frowned upon? That much is shocking. So I do think from an education standpoint, from a structural standpoint, we would see a lot of change if we saw more of an emphasis on foreign languages in our school systems.
What's coming up for me is systemic racism, honestly, because if you think about what some of us have said on this call about why our parents worked so hard to assimilate into white culture, it's because there was a sense of lack of safety if you were to really come out with how different you are. And I think about the way that Black and brown children, 13 and 16-year-old in the last week, have been killed by police. And how can I, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but if I were a parent, how can I, as a parent, say to my child, don't worry, you'll be fine. It's, you're different, you look different, and embrace that, when they're seeing on TV children getting shot. So I think that's one area, like in conjunction with what's going on in the home and in the school, just on a broader level, that has to be solved, right? If my child is not going to be able to succeed because they're perceived as different and worse and not American because they have a different skin color, then what motivation do I have to try to get them to embrace their culture and not just try to be white? As long as it's perceived as like, okay, to be successful, you have to be white, then it's going to be an uphill battle.
Thank you all so much for your responses and feedback. Our next question is, we often focus more attention to the anti-Asian rhetoric that happens to adults. What are the effects, of this type of rhetoric to young children, from your perspective? This one goes to Silong.
Well, I think we covered, when the barriers that, well, when it happens to our adult population, our elderly, there are barriers in why those things are not reported and things like that. So I think that I think part of why we're just now seeing it, Sean mentioned earlier, is, the evidence that we have, we can back up that data. And so I think with that comes with the help of the youth. We have access to technology to record those things, and we know who to report to. We don't have that language barrier necessarily. But yeah, in other ways, it affects the youth. Not just because, sometimes these things are happening to our parents, in other ways, such as like even us growing up and experiencing unintentional discrimination. Like, I had a lot of Korean friends growing up, and they would be asked the question like, hey, where are you from? And if they said, I'm Korean American, they'd be like, oh, you're from Korea, like north or south. I've heard that many, many times. And I think that comes from a lack of education in our system. Like we've mentioned before, whenever we learn about Korea, it's just about the DMZ, demilitarized zone, and that's about all we're taught. So I think that it impacts the youth in a lot of ways that we don't really know about, because they're not talking about it, because I don't think they've really not have reached that point where they're willing to share that information, because a lot of the things that happened to me, like when I was younger, I did not realize until I grew up and reflected on it, and am now, sharing these experiences with everyone today. But
Well, thank you so much, Silong.
I would say, in answer to the question, that young people are more affected by these things than you might think. They see what happens to their adult family members. They see what happens to their mother and their father. They know more than you think they know, and it probably has a negative effect on them. It had a negative effect on me growing up. The solution, I know everyone has said education, but I think you can't really overemphasize that. It's education, education, education. But I also think, like I said before, it's exposure. I have learned so much just by being exposed to different cultures. And I have become more interested in different cultures just by getting to know people from those cultures. You know, you cannot, you'll never understand a different culture until you make an effort to learn about that culture. And I think we as Asian Americans, and if you don't call yourself an Asian American, we of Asian descent, perhaps we need to make more of an effort to expose people to our culture, to, you know, I don't know, just educate people, because we can't really depend on the education system to do it. You know, when I was growing up, the only exposure I had in school to the eastern part of this world was Western civilization. No, it was an Asian history class. That was it. No exposure at all, except for what I saw my mother bring home from her visits to Japan. So I never went to Japan until I was older, to meet my relatives in Japan. So in a way, I wasn't exposed to my own culture. And that was eye-opening myself. So I can say from personal experience, if you don't get to know another culture, you'll never understand it, and you'll never feel unthreatened by it. I think that people feel threatened by different cultures because, let's face it, nobody likes change. They don't like different people who are different. That's just human nature.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, kind of overlapping over that question, this next question is for Sean. What role does the media play in any of these issues and in prevention?
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, the media plays a huge role, but it's also a very subtle role. I wanted to share a video, but I think as time goes on, like I think I'd rather leave you the option of watching the video rather than making you watch it. It's hard to watch. I'm not gonna lie.
I actually have it pulled up, the video.
Oh, you have it pulled up? I mean,
yeah. You want me to share the video still?
You know, I dropped it in the chat. So if you wanna watch it, I think maybe that's probably a better way to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can describe it and then I'll tell you kind of a little bit about it. Basically, what you see in the video is a 16-year-old kid in the Netherlands getting teased by a bunch of his peers, and then he gets kicked in the face. So I'll talk about the media. I also will talk about the impact on youth that the media plays. I'll start with the youth. I think I want you to look at this video on two sides, right? You have the effect that this kind of incident has on the child, the victim, but then the effect that the narrative has on the attacker, right? Because both are very young, both are children, you know? Like, obviously, there's a very visible physical detriment to what's happening to this 16-year-old boy getting kicked. There's also a very negative effect on the attacker, the person who the person who's attacking, right? That is a learned, that is something that is a trait that child picked up from somewhere, to be violent against people who aren't like him, right? And that is not okay, right? And so you have to look at it, you know, with care and with, you know, on both ends, right? How can you help sympathize with this kid who was attacked? Then how can you help reverse some of the mindset, some of the actions that the attacker had? So to talk a little bit about the media, you know, I'll speak very frankly and very openly, right? The day that I saw this video in the Netherlands, right? I work at CNN International, so I'm looking at international and it's what other people covering. The day I saw this, I was on a call with our team and I was just, you know, I was just waking up. I work overnights. My supervisor's catching us all up on the news. He says, "Hey, like, this is what's going on. Here are the new cases. Here's what's going on in the streets. This is happening in June. So there were a lot of protests going on following the murder of George Floyd. This was a very, tense month, right? And then my supervisor says, also, Trump said Kung Flu. Trump tweeted Kung Flu. And that moment for me was this moment of like, oh my gosh, wait, what? Like, what did he say? And that was the first I was hearing of it, because I hadn't caught wind of that yet. And it was a really tough moment for me, because I was reckoning with, I was in shock. I was like, wait, the president of the United States said what? And I didn't even know how to respond. I was speechless. I was kind of going through it, right, at the same time. Now, I really didn't have any words at that point when that happened. And looking back, I wish I did. I wish I had spoken up a little bit more. I wish I had said something like, hey, like, why are we, like, we shouldn't put that on air. Like, we shouldn't, like there's no reason for us to go with that. By the time that I had kind of really come up with this argument in my head, right, it had probably been on air, multiple times, right? And then all of a sudden you see people tweeting it, stories are going around, everybody's saying Kung Flu. And I really wish that in that moment I had said, hey, there's really, if we're going to report on this because it's what the president said, then okay, we should see this video of this child and see the effects that this kind of language has on people, the very direct effects that this kind of thing has on people. So when I say that the media has a very big role in how we see things, yet a very subtle role in how we see things, right? One story isn't going to change how people think, right? But it is going to influence it. And continuously talking about a story is going to impact how people react. And you'll see that in very subtle ways, whether it be people feel like all of a sudden they're allowed to push people or punch people or slash people in the face. It's that permission that comes with reporting certain things that we have to be very careful of in the media. And I'll say, just to kind of conclude, like this is a thing that, what you see on the news isn't always what's going on in the newsroom, right? Because this is a topic that, I brought up in a very heated way, like last year, to even our CEO. And I confronted them. I said, hey, listen, I don't think we're covering this enough. And despite the fact that we continue to report Kung Flu, and you'll continue to hear that language because that's the nature of television news, there are people in newsrooms who are constantly speaking up. And, after having that really honest conversation, we started to see more longer length packages, longer length pieces on the rise in anti-Asian violence. So, I think the conversation that we're having now is obviously a result of the incidents that happened in Atlanta and the incidents that have been happening over the past year. But, these conversations have been primed by, the way that the narrative has developed in the media. And you'll see that from the other side too. The more you say, the more you antagonize China, the more you antagonize Chinese people, subtly you'll see more of a allowance on that thing. So right now what you see is a push and pull between two different sides in terms of how can we drive the narrative surrounding Asian Americans. Is it going to incite more violence, or is it going to incite more people to sympathize? And you'll see that in every topic.
Wow, thank you for that, Sean. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Anyone else would like to chime in?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I too was outraged by that comment, and I won't get too much into politics here, but things have quieted down quite a bit, and we don't hear too much of that, but we still do hear it. And I think that it goes back to people just thinking that Well, it's about the cancel culture thing, isn't it, Sean? People say cancel culture in a negative way. I don't think anyone wants to cancel culture, but I think a lot of people want to correct an incorrect perception about culture and about history. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've had an incorrect perception about a lot of things that have happened in the past. There's nothing wrong with correcting that to make things better. And I think the news media has a role in that. The news media is critical to a free society. And if we don't encourage and cultivate that, then we're not going to be a free society. We're going to be a society that only thinks in one way or is afraid to think in a free way. I have appreciated what the news media has done over the past 4 years in sticking to the narrative and exposing false news or fake news, if you will. My fake news is someone else's fake news. I mean, my real news is someone else's fake news, right? The news media plays a critical role, I think, in educating the public about what's going on. But I have to agree with you. I think maybe sometimes we pay too much attention or we give too much attention to the negative things that are happening in the world. And that just feeds the people who say, hey, look, this is just ridiculous. We don't need to cancel culture. This is a great country. And what you're trying to do is negate that. I think the news media should play a bigger role in saying, hey, wait, that's not what we're doing.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, right? I think, it for us in this industry, it always comes back down to truth, right? What have we confirmed to be true? What do we know is fact? It's a tricky situation. Especially like I find myself having taken this job to be, especially with the pandemic happening, one of the most hated people. We're talking Asian American journalists. It's like people don't like us. People don't like journalists. People don't like Asians right now, and so it's a tough role to be in. I'm not gonna lie, but the anchor point is always going to be the truth, right? I want people to know what's real. I want people to know what's true. I mean, we were covering, on the international side, we were covering the pandemic early January, and we were talking about it in Asia. I mean, it was real, and we had deniers left and right, and even in the newsroom, I remember saying, hey, I found this account of a nurse who's really struggling. She's stressed out of her mind, this Chinese nurse. My team couldn't confirm it because she was speaking Chinese. And I said, no, I'm telling you, like, this is what is happening. This is a nurse who's going through some really tough things, because we couldn't confirm it, because we couldn't find the source, because it was a WeChat video and we couldn't backtrack it. We weren't able to tell that story, which I understand. But, the anchor point is always going to be the truth. What do we know? And from there, it might sound like something ugly. It might sound like it might sound like we're trying to cancel something. It might sound like, something's really like a negative way, but it's always rooted in truth, right? It's always rooted in, this is what happened. And you might think it's ugly. You might not like it. You might think we're trying to cancel it, but like you said, Bob, maybe this is a situation that needs to be corrected. Maybe this is just a situation that's just so wrong. And it's true that, we need to show it to you, and you need to understand that this is what the situation looks like. And this is a very real thing. And I think as long as we keep our anchor in the truth, then we're not, our integrity is intact. I mean, there are a lot of, we can go into all the minute political dealings within a certain news organization and kind of the way that news operates as an industry. But journalists, I'll tell you, journalists, not the business people, the journalists, that's our anchor point. And so, yeah, we stay strong in that.
Wow. I can imagine. Thank you, Sean, for that, and Bob. Our next question is, what types of changes to legislation are needed to protect AAP communities and other vulnerable minority groups from harassment and targeted violence? And Jennifer, I think you mentioned earlier that you were a part of the AAPI organization here in Nashville. So I'd like to direct that question to you.
Yeah, API Middle Tennessee. I mean, what comes immediately to mind is with the Atlanta shootings, like having such a tough time calling that a hate crime, right? I think we really need to broaden our definition of what gets counted as a hate crime. Our definition is based in like a very, very, very old definition that just doesn't fit, especially as we've talked about. Racism has evolved, right? Racism has evolved to the different forms that we see today. So it really needs to embrace that. And kind of what I was alluding to earlier, talking about kids and families, it's just systemic racism, right? As long as we have legislation that does not punish racism, does not punish police brutality, then we're not going to have a safe society for people of color.
Thank you.
How many states have hate crime laws? I thought I heard just recently that the minority of states have hate crime laws.
Good question. I don't know.
It is a good question.
Does Tennessee have hate crime laws?
Yes, it does. It just recently happened. I think it's Tennessee and California and New York.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of, crimes going on right now. And I think the number one crime is either Tennessee or California. And the second one is Tennessee. But it's right now it's going a little bit down for Tennessee. I'm not sure, but those are the thing I know.
Yeah, in Tennessee, I think there are three main hate crime statutes. I know there are at least three laws that are related to hate crimes.
Well, I would say that we as citizens need to push our legislators to pass laws like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way that people are going to be prosecuted for hate crimes.
Oh, absolutely.
If there aren't any hate crime laws on the books, then people will not be discouraged from committing hate crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that that's a step in the right direction.
I think actually one of the hate crimes laws are, it's a crime to intentionally desecrate a place of worship or a burial site. A year later, in Tennessee lawmakers passed that in another law that states that it's illegal to intimidate others from exercising their civil rights through injury or threat of injury. But there's quite a few hate crime laws.
I don't think we're ever going to see hate crimes go away altogether. As long as we have people on earth, there are going to be hate crimes. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic or negative. But I've been around long enough to know that people generally don't change.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to concentrate on the younger generation.
Absolutely.
I don't see my generation changing. I just don't. And that's a sad fact. But you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's a true statement in many ways. And I think that the key to seeing this disappear in the future is to, like I said before, expose young people as much as possible to different cultures, to show them that the people who make up those cultures are just like them.
Mhm. Thank you for that. So Mahlet is going to wrap up our last set of questions.
Yes, so at the beginning of this event, both Daniel and I informed you guys we work at the Intercultural and Diversity Affairs Office here at MTSU. And that's the center that a lot of students, faculty, and community members come to asking event information, also to learn about different cultures. We have a lot of artifacts that they come and look at and try to expand their knowledge when it comes to different cultures. So we do have a wide variety of cultures here on the panel. So I just want to ask you, what's the best method to continue educating people about the history of the Asian American and Pacific Islander, and how could we form allyship against racism in our community? And this is open to everyone.
So I think,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, it's okay. You started. There's a lot of resources out there. If you're on social media, there's a lot of accounts you can follow. There's Rice Feed, there's Next Shark, there's Asian BuzzFeed. There's a lot of different social media accounts. There's also a PBS special. That's like a 5-part special. That's really, really, really good. It's free right now on PBS. And there's also Google, when I think about allyship and I think about people that I work with and friends that are white, they'll be like, oh, tell me what to do. And it's like, no, you guys go look it up and figure it out. Racism has been around for a long, long, long time. You can look up what you can do to learn. So there's a little bit of that. Might be a little bit of a harsh answer, but I feel like there's so much out there right now that people can dig themselves into a YouTube hole if they want on whatever topic they want.
I was just thinking in terms of higher education. I think a good way to start is actually reaching out to a lot of the student organization, and maybe also, sharing information. I seriously was not very much aware of what the organization does. I mean, happened that I'm on the panel today, so I'm really learning a lot just by sitting in here and listening to all of you, and I think this would be a great opportunity, for example, to invite, you guys to come into some of the classes and share with the students, because I think if the students are aware that there are such resources around, just by exposing them to it, I think it would give them additional knowledge and also make an attempt for them to get to know other people. Perhaps they might want to do it, but they just do not know where to reach out to. Social media is great, but then it's really good to actually have a real person to connect to, because that is a great way for them to kind of truly reach out. Yeah.
I have another one. You can travel. Do one thing, travel somewhere that you've never been before. Either if it's from South America, Singapore, South Korea, Australia, anything, something that you can explore and think about different types of cultures. Because I have been to India and I have been to Scotland, and I would love to go to Singapore, and I would love to go to Japan and Tokyo, because my mom has been to Japan and South Korea, so I'm jealous of her. But just travel, see something that you like. See Egypt. What does Egypt look like? What is, something that, have you ever gone on a boat and touched a orca or a whale or something and just reflect on that? So another thing is to travel. Yep. And see different things.
Betsy,
sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Betsy said, that MTSU have a very strong study abroad. So, if you're a student in MTSU, you should go and join the study abroad. They have a lot of study abroad courses.
What I was going to say on that, we've talked about policy, we've talked about education and resources and different things you can do to expand your own mindset, whether it be travel or whatever. I recognize that this might not be the most popular opinion, but I am at the heart of it a journalist, and the way I was trained is we talk to everybody, we talk to everybody, no matter what political affiliation. We want perspectives from everybody. I would challenge people, and it's not going to be easy, but I would really challenge you to sit down and talk with somebody who maybe doesn't share your views. If you're Asian, maybe they have a perception of Asians that make you feel uncomfortable. And I know that's not an easy thing to do, and maybe it's easier for somebody like me because I grew up in Tennessee and I always had to do this. But I think, one very tangible thing that you can do on an individual basis is sit down and speak to somebody who looks at you like you're the worst person in the entire world and convince them that you're not. I mean, that is one of the most powerful things you can do. I mean, I've had to do that several times, and you'll be surprised at the kind of change a little bit of patience and a little bit of understanding in just 2 years can do, right? Being able to listen to somebody who doesn't have your views can go a long way, and you'll be surprised at how much you can influence somebody by just listening to them and letting them listen to you. So I think one of the issues that we get into these days is this constant yelling at each other, constant back and forth. Progress doesn't happen like that. Progress happens when you can sit down at a diner with a person with completely opposite views and come just a little bit closer to each other. That's where progress really happens. So it's not an easy thing to do, but that would be my challenge to the room today.
I also really want to add on to what Sean said too. Go ahead, sit down with somebody who is different than you, have a good conversation. Even if it's like you see them in a different perspective, say hello. Say something like, how's your day? Do you want to learn about who's different types of culture and who you see? So that's another good thing too as well.
Someone had mentioned also earlier about being asked the question that was, it could be offensive. Where are you from, or what are you? It's an offensive question. I agree, but I think that we need to look at that person as someone who needs to be educated. Let's face it, that person needs to be educated about the fact that I am not from Japan. I am from the United States. I was born here. I'm a citizen just like you. And my mother just happens to be from another country. That person just needs to be educated, and we need to look at that person that way. When I sit down in an airplane, I don't know who I'm sitting next to most of the time. And a lot of the time, they'll strike up a conversation with me, and I never know where it's going to go. Sometimes it surprises me, and sometimes I'm not surprised. I've sat next to people who have very different political views than me, and I've just listened, nodded my head, and tried to understand where they're coming from. And I will occasionally give my own opinion, but like Sean said, I think it's just a matter of, I think we as Asians need to be a little bit more outspoken, if you will, maybe, about who we are and what our culture is all about, what our background is all about. And if we each do that, I think that collectively things will improve. I think for a long time, because we have been a culture that wants to just, assimilate and not make waves and not make noise. I think that has contributed to the problems that we have today.
I think that goes with, the jokes as well. Like whenever we hear a joke, I mean, in the past, at least I have kind of just laughed it off, kind of just went along with it to avoid an uncomfortable situation. Well, I think that it's no longer fair to do that because we're uncomfortable in hearing that joke. So we need to be comfortable with they need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable as well. Like just saying, hey, that's not even really funny. I've heard that a trillion times in my life. And just being really honest, that I think will go a long way because that opens the conversation of, whoa, that may not be their intention to offend you. So just having that conversation, like, what about it is offensive and how does that make you feel? And I think that will impact lots of people because they may never say that joke again. They may never ask another Asian American that question or that joke. So I think that speaks volumes.
Yes, I do agree with all of your perspectives, and I did just want to touch up on with using Google and different social medias. I kind of believe that there is a bias when it comes to what social media portrays when it comes to foreign countries. I've personally experienced it when it comes to the country I'm from, and they would say, this is America, and show New York City. And then they would say, this is Ethiopia, or part of, another foreign country, and show the very worst. So that's one thing we work on in our office, because we want to show the authentic cultures that other countries have to offer besides, beautiful cities of San Diego. And I'm not hating on America or anything like that, but that's just what we see often, and we're trying to change that perspective. So we try to provide different informations, like I told you about. We ask different orgs to bring artifacts that represent their countries with a little description. So when students come in to see us, and they will see it, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is what it is. So as much as we want people to take time out of their day and research and kind of gain that knowledge themselves, we want to give them that first step, that to push them and to push them to learn more things about it. And I do believe this conversation is very special and a path to start a very impactful change in our community. And I want to keep contact with all of you guys and work together. This is just the beginning. It's not a conversation that we have today and then move on to a different event. I would like to have these conversations and explore the changes that we have made based on a conversation, because most of the time we talk about problems and never really talk about the solutions and how that has impacted the society. So I really do want to thank you for being part of this event today.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being a part of it. Let's give a hand to all of our panelists and all of our other participants. Thank you so much, Jennifer Wang, Sean Paik, Silong, Mr. Bob Fowler, and Jane Lim, and all of our other participants. We really appreciate y'all's support of this event, and I hope that we can continue conversations like this as we address some of these systematic issues that are going on. Thank you so much again, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Daniel.
I'm going to post an end of the survey or end of the discussion survey. If anyone can take it, I'm going to, the link is in the chat. If you guys, it's just super short. So
yes, there is a survey that we would like everyone to take.
It'll help us gauge our effectiveness and what we need to do to improve. So,
And thank
I
you
would
so
just-
much, 401 Project, for your assistance and co-sponsorship. Really appreciate
thank you, and thank you all. This was amazing.
I would just
Well,
like to say I'd like to see more of these. I think this is, and not just about Asians, about the hate that we see around the Black Lives Matter. I think if we are all together, all of us, Asians, Blacks, Hispanics, if we stick together, we can change things.
I agree with you 100%. And you will see more of this, especially coming up in the fall. We're planning an array of events. So I'll be reaching out to you to collaborate too, as well as Mayhan.
Yes.
Okay.
And hopefully the mask will be gone, and we're in a better place so we can actually meet in person. And we're actually maybe thinking like a table talk. We all sit across each other and actually have human contact and conversations.
And I was going to say it'll be nice when we can get back together again, have events, maybe plan events that where people can come, when students and faculty and staff can come to learn about different cultures.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
Hi, Casey. It seems the survey link you put out.
Is it not working?
Yeah.
Oh,
well, it does go to your site, the 411 Project. Then where to go from there?
Okay. It should go straight to. It's called the effectiveness survey. So.
Oh no, it doesn't go.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
All right.
No.
Let me just copy it from this. Maybe I typed it in.
I got there okay.
You did? Okay. Well,
Interesting.
I'll put it in with the HTTPS. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
The joys of technology.
Also, I wanted to say is that I hope I'll see you all in person too, and I just want to say hello and talk to you guys individual and just have a good conversation of different cultures, and not because this world is very, very small, very, very small, and hope in the future I would love to see you guys.
Yes, thank you for joining us tonight.
Yep. Same here.